two kingdoms sat at the bottom of the same ocean and still managed to hate each other for 100 years. Somerville sat in the deep cold. The kind of deep where light doesn't reach, where the pressure alone could crush a lesser creature. The mermen there were built for it, broad-shouldered, silver-scaled, with bioluminescent markings that pulsed along their spines like a slow heartbeat. Regal, ancient, proud in the way that only old, wounded things learn to be proud. Draken was different. Draken sat in the warm currents, closer to the surface, where the water shimmered amber and gold during sunrise hours. Their mermen were leaner, copper-toned, with iridescent fins that caught light the way fire catches wind. Faster, more dangerous in open water. The kind of kingdom that didn't need walls because it had speed. And for a decade, actually longer than that, these two kingdoms had been bleeding each other dry. Border skirmishes, poisoned trade routes, assassinations dressed up as accidents. Fathers sending sons to die over territory that neither of them even fully understood anymore. The original reason for the war had been forgotten by everyone except the historians, and even the historians disagreed. It was just hate, clean, inherited hate, the kind you're handed at birth and told to carry. Fyren grew up carrying it. He was the second prince of Somerville. Not the heir, his older brother Orm held that crown. Fyren was the spare. The one they sent to diplomacy summits he wasn't expected to speak at. The one trained in combat he wasn't expected to use. He was decorative in the way that second princes always are, beautiful, educated, and quietly invisible. His scales were pale silver, almost white at the edges, and his eyes were this strange shade of deep indigo that looked almost black in low light. He had his mother's jaw and his father's silence. He'd learned early that silence was safer than opinion in the halls of Somerville. He wasn't bitter about it. Not really. He'd just learned to exist in the margins. Rhane didn't know how to exist in the margins. That was the first thing Fyren noticed about him. They met by accident. That part is important. There was no plan, no setup, no prophecy pointing fingers at a specific current. Fyren had been sent to map the outer borders of Somerville's territory. Busy work, the kind assigned to someone you want occupied but not involved. He'd drifted further than he was supposed to. The border markers thinned out near the meridian shelf, a wide flat stretch of ocean floor covered in phosphorescent kelp that neither kingdom claimed, because neither wanted the maintenance cost of defending it. Rhane had been running, not from anything specific. He just ran. Draken's training regime pushed its young warriors hard, and Rhane had discovered early that if he swam fast enough and far enough, the noise in his head quieted. He was the third prince of Draken, which meant even less than being the second prince of Somerville, which meant he had a lot of noise to outrun. He came tearing through the kelp forest like something was chasing him, fins cutting clean arcs, copper scales flashing, and then he nearly collided with Fyren at full speed in the middle of the meridian shelf. They both stopped. The kelp swayed around them, and Fyren, who had been trained in diplomacy, who had sat through 100 tense negotiations and never once broken composure, said nothing, just stared. Rhane stared back. His chest was heaving from the swim. His amber eyes, bright, almost gold, were wide with surprise. And then, because Rhane had never once in his life defaulted to silence, he said, "You're Somerville." Not an insult, just an observation, like he was confirming a species. "You're Draken," Fyren replied, and that was it. That was the whole first conversation. But neither of them left. They just floated there in the kelp, on opposite sides of an invisible border, for longer than either of them would later admit to. Rhane eventually turned around and swam back toward Draken. Fyren went back to his mapping. And for 3 days, neither of them mentioned it to anyone. On the 4th day, Fyren went back to the meridian shelf. He told himself it was to finish the mapping. He had not finished the mapping. Rhane was already there. The meetings became a habit before they became anything else. Every few days, one of them would drift to the shelf, and the other would show up eventually. They never arranged it openly, never sent a message. They just knew. The way the tide knows where the shore is. Rhane talked constantly. He talked about training drills and his oldest brother's temper and the way Draken's coral gardens looked at dawn when the warm current pushed through. He complained loudly and laughed louder and had opinions about everything. Fish migration patterns, old songs, the taste of deep trench water versus shallow shelf water, the political idiocy of both their fathers. Fyren mostly listened, but he started talking too, slowly, in pieces. He told Rhane about the library in Somerville's lower palace, where the historical maps were so old the ink had almost faded to nothing. He talked about the silence of deep water and how sometimes it felt like a weight and sometimes it felt like a blanket. He talked about his mother, who had died 3 winters back from a cold current sickness, and how the palace had gotten quieter after that in a way that had nothing to do with sound. Rhane listened to every word. He didn't interrupt when Fyren got quiet. He didn't try to fix it. He just stayed. That might have been the thing that undid Fyren completely. Not Rhane's beauty, though Rhane was stunning in the way warm current mermen always were, all fluid grace and copper fire. Not the laugh. Not even the way Rhane looked at him like he was worth looking at. It was the staying. A month in, Rhane swam to Fyren's side of the kelp and stopped about a foot away and said, "I've been thinking about you constantly. It's annoying." Fyren looked at him for a long moment. "Same," he said. Rhane's mouth curved. "Yeah. Don't make it strange." "I'm not making it strange. You're the one who turned red. Mermen don't blush. Your markings are glowing." Fyren's bioluminescent lines were, in fact, pulsing faster than usual. He pressed his palm to his collarbone like he could manually slow them down, and Rhane laughed, that big, uncontained laugh, and the distance between them disappeared in a way that felt like physics and not choice. The kiss was quiet, tasted like salt and warm current. Rhane's hand came up to Fyren's jaw, careful, like he was handling something breakable, and Fyren thought distantly that nobody had ever been that careful with him before. They stayed in the kelp for a long time after that. This went on for 3 months. 3 months of stolen meetings and long conversations and learning each other in the way you only learn someone when the time is borrowed. Rhane memorized the exact shade Fyren's markings turned when he was happy. Fyren learned that Rhane was afraid of the dark. Not the dark of deep water, but the dark that lived in quiet rooms, the dark that felt like forgetting. He learned that Rhane had nightmares about his father's disappointment and that he wore it like armor over everything else. They talked about the war, carefully at first, then more honestly. "It doesn't even make sense anymore," Rhane said once, sitting on the flat shelf of rock they'd started using as a meeting point. "I asked my father what we're actually fighting for. He looked at me like I'd asked him to dissolve the kingdom." "Same," Fyren said. "My father called it honor debt. Like there's an amount you have to pay before you're allowed to stop. Honor debt." Rhane repeated it slowly. "That's just a fancy way of saying nobody wants to be the one who blinks first." "Yes. So everyone keeps bleeding." "Yes." Rhane was quiet for a moment. Then, "What if we stopped it?" Fyren looked at him. "How?" "There's a ritual. The blood merge." Rhane said it carefully, watching Fyren's face. "I found it in Draken's oldest records. It was designed for peace treaties between kingdoms. An heir from each house joins their life force. It fuses the bloodlines. The prophecies say it ends feuds permanently. The kingdoms become kin. The blood merge is forbidden," Fyren said. "By our fathers. Not by the ocean." Fyren stared at the kelp swaying in the current. He knew about the blood merge. Somerville's records mentioned it too, in the restricted archives, buried under 3 layers of royal seal. He'd read it once, fast, years ago, before a guard rounded the corner. He also knew about the prophecy attached to it. "There's a curse," he said. "There are a lot of curses in old books," Rhane said. "Half of them were written by afraid people trying to scare other people." Fyren should have pushed harder. He knew that now. He should have gone back to the restricted archives and read every word of what the Mercury prophecy actually said. But he was in love. Genuinely, completely in love for the first time in his life, and Rhane was looking at him with those gold eyes full of something that looked like faith, and Fyren chose the faith. They did it at the meridian shelf where they'd always met. Rhane cut his palm first. The blood that rose was dark copper, luminous in the low light. Fyren cut his own, and his blood ran silver pale. When they pressed their hands together, the blood didn't mix the way normal blood does. It merged. It spiraled. It became something else. A liquid that was neither Somerville nor Draken, but something entirely new, silver and copper twisted into a single metallic thread. For 1 second, it was the most beautiful thing Fyren had ever seen. Then the cold arrived. Not cold like water temperature. Cold like being submerged in something that wanted to punish you. It crept up from their joined hands, up their arms, into their chests, and both of them gasped at the same time. Rhane's grip on Fyren's hand tightened. Fyren didn't let go. The silver-copper thread pulsed once, bright as a star, and then it split, half flowing into Fyren, half into Rhane, and settled somewhere behind their abdomens with a weight that hadn't been there before. They separated their hands. The cuts had already closed. "Rhane," Fyren said. "I feel it too." Beneath the surface of Fyren's skin, where his lower abdomen curved, something was beginning to glow. A low, mercury silver light, barely visible, but there. Rhane looked down at himself. The same glow, the same pulse, synchronized. Neither of them moved for a long time. The Mercury Curse wasn't a myth. The return to Somerville took Fyren 2 hours. 2 hours of swimming through familiar currents while his mind cycled through every worst possibility in order. He told himself he would explain it calmly. He would request an audience. He would present the historical argument for blood merge peace rituals and the political benefit of ending the war through bloodline fusion, and his father, even his cold, impenetrable father, would have to see the logic. King Thalassos of Somerville did not see the logic. He saw the glow. The guards must have already told him, or maybe the Mercury Curse had announced itself in ways Fyren couldn't see, because Thalassos was in the throne hall with his council assembled when Fyren arrived. Not a scheduled meeting. Waiting. The look on his father's face was not anger. It was worse than anger. It was recognition. The cold, settled face of a man who had prepared for this moment and found it disappointing rather than surprising. "You performed the merge," Thalassos said. Fyren stood in the center of the hall. He could feel his stomach glowing even under his court robes. There was no point in denying it. "I did," he said. "With Prince Rhane of Draken. As a piece. I know what it was." Thalassos's voice was flat. "You think you're the first fool to try it?" The council was silent. Fyren's older brother Orym stood at the far edge of the group with his jaw tight and his eyes somewhere else. "The Mercury prophecy was written by our grandfathers," Thalassos said. "Both mine and Draken's. A mutual clause. Binding. If any heir of either bloodline performed the blood merge without royal sanction, the curse would activate. Not to punish the enemy, to punish the child who betrayed their crown." He stepped down from the throne, slowly. "We designed it. Both crowns. Together. The one treaty Somerville and Draken ever agreed on. Fyren processed this. You and the King of Draken, you built the curse together. We sealed the war in place," Thalassos said, "to prevent exactly this kind of sentimental stupidity." He looked at the glow beneath Fyren's robes with something close to disgust. "You carry the consequence now. Both of you. You designed a punishment to use against your own sons. I designed a deterrent." Thalassos's voice didn't waver, and then raised a son too blind to be deterred. He turned back to the throne. "You are no longer Prince of Somerville. You are no longer a son of this house. You have until sunrise to leave the Deepwater Palace. If you are found in Somerville waters after that, you will be treated as trespassers." Fyren didn't beg. He was his father's son in that one way. He didn't beg. He left. He found Rhane 3 hours later in the kelp forest. Rhane had clearly been thrown out faster. He was sitting on the flat rock with his arms crossed and a split above his eyebrow that hadn't been there before. "He hit you," Fyren said. He threw a ceremonial trident at me, Rhane said. I ducked. Mostly. He touched the cut. Your father. Exile by sunrise. Fyren settled beside him. They designed the curse together. Our fathers. Jointly. Years ago. Rhane was quiet for a moment. Then he exhaled through his teeth. A long, slow breath. They were protecting the war, he said. Not us. Not the kingdoms. Just the war. Yes. Rhane looked at the silver-copper glow emanating from both of them. Their abdomens pulsed in slow sync. Inhale, exhale, the mercury light moving like breath. Between them, though not visibly, there was something else. A pull. Fyren noticed it when he'd swum to the kelp. A subtle drag when he moved more than a body length from where Rhane had been sitting, like something invisible had taken hold. We can't be more than 10 feet apart, Rhane said, like he'd already tested it. I tried swimming to the surface earlier to think. At about 12 feet out, he stopped, pressed 2 fingers to his sternum. It feels like being pulled inside out. Fyren didn't need to test it. He believed it. The Mercury bump. There wasn't another word for it. Pulsed steadily on both of them. It wasn't painful yet, but it was heavy in a way that had nothing to do with physical weight. They were both carrying something real. The Sunlit Isles, Rhane said. Fyren looked at him. There's a sanctuary system there. The Tidewatcher Chronicles mention it. Cave systems deep enough that surface hunters don't go, warm enough to sustain a birth. Protected by old ward magic. Rhane's jaw was set. We go there. We make it there. And we have the baby safe. Fyren looked at this man. This infuriating, reckless, gold-eyed man who'd walked into his life in a kelp forest and completely dismantled the careful architecture of his isolation, and felt something settle in his chest. Not calm. Not peace. Just the absolute certainty that he would not walk away from this. How far? Fyren asked. 60 leagues through the shallow meridian. The Reef-Guardian's territory. Yes. Fyren stared at the dark water above them. They call us abyssal dwellers. They won't let us pass. Probably not, Rhane agreed. But we don't need their permission. The first week of the journey taught them both what the tether actually meant. They swam side by side, close enough that their elbows nearly touched at every stroke, because anything beyond 6 feet started the ache. At 7 feet it became sharp. At 10 it became the kind of pain that stopped thought entirely. They tested it once on the second day, purely to understand the mechanism. Rhane pushed 8 feet away while Fyren held still, and they both doubled over simultaneously, the mercury in their abdomens destabilizing into violent, sloshing heat. Never again. They learned to move as one body. Fyren's longer strokes and Rhane's speed found a rhythm eventually. Fyren pulling them through resistance, Rhane steering. When a current hit, they angled together without speaking. When a shelf of rock required navigating, they flattened and drifted through simultaneously. And in the spaces between danger, they learned each other differently. Rhane hummed when he was thinking. Low, tuneless sounds that he probably didn't know he made. Fyren learned what each variation meant. A rising hum meant planning. A flat hum meant worry. A quick double beat meant he'd found something interesting and was about to do something impulsive about it. Fyren reached for Rhane's hand in dark water. Not always out of fear. Sometimes just because the dark was wide and Rhane's grip was warm and it was the only geography that felt like home anymore. Rhane never commented on it. He just turned his palm up. On the 4th night, floating in a rest current with their bodies pressed close to conserve warmth, Rhane pressed his forehead to Fyren's temple and said quietly, I'm not sorry we did it. Fyren turned to look at him. This close, the copper-silver glow from both their abdomens painted Rhane's face in shifting metallic light. He looked like something that had been cast out of a different story. Something brighter. I know, Fyren said. Are you? Rhane asked. Sorry. Fyren thought about the throne hall. His father's voice. The exile that had been swift and clean as a blade. The kingdom he'd loved in the way you love something that never quite loves you back. No, he said. I'm not. Rhane kissed him once, soft and slow, and the mercury in both their bellies pulsed warmly at the same time, like a heartbeat that belonged to something other than them. The Reef-Guardians found them on day 9. 3 scouts. First, the shallow water warriors had skins that blended with reef texture, mottled white and coral orange, nearly invisible against the limestone ridges of the shallow meridian. Fyren spotted the first one only because it blinked, and the movement was wrong against the rock. Rhane had already stopped swimming. 3, he murmured. 4, Fyren corrected. There was a fourth behind them, cutting off retreat. The Reef-Guardians were shorter than deep-water mermen, broader across the shoulder, with spines along their forearms built for reef combat. Their weapons were reef lances, long, narrow, hardened from coral, sharp enough to pass through scale. The lead scout looked at the twin glows on Fyren and Rhane's abdomens, and his expression moved through something complicated. Not just hatred. Something between revulsion and a deep, specific fear that Fyren recognized from the restricted archives. Mercury pregnancies. Old stories. The kind of story you pass down to children to explain why some things are forbidden. Abyssal freaks, the scout said. Rhane's spine went rigid. Fyren put a hand on his arm. Not a restraint, a signal. Wait, we are passing through to the Sunlit Isles, Fyren said loudly and clearly, in the Tradewater dialect that all reef nations understood. We have no quarrel with the Reef-Guardians. We are not here to disturb the meridian. You're deep water filth in our current, the scout said, and you carry an abyssal curse. He raised his lance. The Reef-Guardians purge curses. They attacked in a spread formation. Fighting while tethered was unlike anything either of them had trained for. Every dodge had to account for 2 bodies. Every strike had to be timed to prevent one of them from pulling the tether too far. Rhane moved right, Fyren moved with him, close, right hip to right shoulder, and Rhane's lance grabbed off the first scout's grip in the opening exchange, carved an arc that Fyren ducked under without being told to duck. They found the synchronization in the first 30 seconds of pure survival need. Fyren read the reef formations called angles in short bursts. Rhane executed. When a lance came at Fyren's blind side, Rhane was already there. Body turned, taking the impact on his shoulder instead of letting it land. Fyren felt the shock of it in his own chest, the tether transmitting the hit, and for 1 second lost vision in his left eye. They finished it in under 2 minutes. For Reef-Guardians down, contained, not dead. Fyren insisted on not dead. Rhane had wanted to argue, but the mercury had pulsed hard when his adrenaline spiked and pain made him agree faster. They swam. Fast, low to the rock, not stopping until the reef texture changed from shallow meridian limestone to the open water stone of the middle shelf. Rhane's shoulder was bleeding a slow copper-dark line. Fyren pressed his palm to it without asking, holding pressure, and Rhane made a short sound of protest that dissolved into quiet. We move at night from here, Fyren said. Agreed. They didn't talk about how close it had been. Neither of them had the space for it yet. The last 2 weeks of the journey lived in their bodies more than in their memories. The Mercury Bumps were visibly larger by week 3. The translucent abdominal sacs had swelled from a faint glow to a full, pulsing presence. The silver-copper fluid inside moving in slow rolls. The baby's consciousness. And there was a consciousness now. Fyren could feel it. A warm awareness that pressed gently against the inside of his sac like a curious hand. Moved between them constantly through the tether. When Fyren was exhausted and slowing, he'd feel Rhane's essence push through their shared connection like a second wind. Not clean, not painless, but there, sustaining. When Rhane's shoulder wound flared during cold current patches and his strokes faltered, Fyren's silver essence brightened and pulled them forward. They were not 2 people traveling together anymore. They were one system, imperfect and interdependent and stubbornly alive. Rhane talked less as they got closer. That was how Fyren knew the fear was building. Not of the destination but of what would happen when they arrived. The birth. The mercury solidifying. Neither of them knew exactly what that meant for their bodies. On the 57th day of travel, during a night crossing through warm bioluminescent water, Rhane said, "What if we can't survive it?" Fyren kept swimming. One stroke. Another. "We'll survive it," he said. "You don't know that." "No," Fyren agreed. "But we've come 60 leagues while tethered together at 6 feet, with a shared pregnancy, hunted by reef warriors and deep-sea bounty runners, after being thrown out of 2 different kingdoms simultaneously." He paused. "The universe has had enough chances to finish us. I don't think it's planning to." Rhane was quiet. Then a low hum. Not the planning hum, not the worry hum. The other one. The one that meant he was choosing to believe something. On the 58th day, as the sunrise current turned the water above them to shifting gold, they found the cave entrance. The Sunlit Isles sanctuary was exactly what the chronicles said and nothing like Fyren had imagined. The cave system opened into a cathedral of underwater rock, the walls threaded with pale mineral veins that glowed like starlight in saltwater. Warm current channels ran through the floor. The water temperature was perfect, not cold deep, not surface hot, but the precise warmth of a living body. They went still in the entrance for a long moment. 58 days. 2,000 heartbeats of fear. And here was the other side. Rhane swam in first. Fyren followed. They found a wide chamber in the inner system where the floor was smooth and the walls curved inward like held hands. And they stopped there and just breathed. The mercury in both their abdomens had changed overnight. The fluid was thicker now, the glow deeper, the movement slower. It was beginning to solidify, not hard but denser, the way a wave looks just before it breaks. "It's starting," Rhane said. "Soon," Fyren agreed. They had days left. Maybe less. It began as warmth, then pressure, then something that had no name in any language Fyren knew. Both of them felt it at the same time. A deep seismic pulling from the inside, the mercury sacs contracting in synchronized waves. The tether between them flared white. They had been lying side by side in the warm chamber, hands already linked, and Fyren heard Rhane make one sharp sound before going very quiet and focused. The way Rhane only ever went quiet when something required every piece of him. The mercury solidified and then didn't hold. It fractured gently, from both sides at once, the translucent sacs opening not with violence but with the inevitability of something completing its purpose. Silver and copper fluid met in the water between them, and the consciousness that had been living in both of them, that warm, curious awareness, gathered itself together. Fyren felt the moment it became one. The moment something that had lived in both of them simultaneously finished becoming itself. The baby's first sound was confused. Not a cry exactly, more of a resonant note, silver copper. The tone of 2 metals discovering they'd been made to harmonize. It hung in the cave water and the bioluminescent walls pulsed in response. And Fyren thought distantly that he'd never in his life heard anything that beautiful. Rhane pulled the child between them and held on. His hands were shaking. Fyren put his arms around both of them, around Rhane and the baby both, and pressed his forehead to Rhane's. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The baby eventually found Fyren's finger, wrapped a small fist around it, and squeezed once. Small and strong and absolutely certain. Rhane laughed. Wet, broken, relieved. "Hi," he said softly. "Hi, we're here." Fyren closed his eyes. They had started this at a border that wasn't supposed to matter, in a kelp forest between 2 kingdoms that had taught their children to hate. They had carried a prophecy designed as a punishment and turned it into something neither of their father's curses had accounted for. A life that was the product of both of them, held between both of them, in a sanctuary that the ocean itself had kept waiting. Outside the cave, 60 leagues of hostile water. 2 crowns that had stripped them of their names. Bounty hunters who hadn't been called off. A world that had looked at their love and called it a curse. Inside the cave, warm current. Glowing walls. Rhane's arms around the baby and Fyren's arms around Rhane and a small, new heartbeat that didn't know it was supposed to be impossible. The mercury had done what mercury does. It had held under pressure. It had found its form.
If you loved this video, show me some support by subscribing and clicking the notification bell.